we have some really cool research from the cognitive approach to go over and learn about. And this first one, have you ever had the experience where you meet somebody who reminds you of somebody you already know? In psychology, that is often called the deja vu effect. And some really interesting work on that by Susan Anderson, showing transference, how we react to that, is something called transference. Really cool work. And then unwanted thoughts. How often have we been in a situation where we want to stop thinking about something? Well, what happens if you stop thinking about something? Usually it's all you can think about. Imagine how funny the first study was on unwanted thoughts, and how interesting it was to find out what they did discover after that. What can you do that will help? Priming studies. Priming is interesting. What priming means is purposely bringing something to mind for others. And these studies are done on interpretation. How we interpret information depends on what we have in our mind at the time. It can really color that. So again, talking about some humorous studies. And then the cognitive approach theorists have really come up with an interesting technique for helping people to get over addictions. Also, we're going to be looking at facial feedback studies. Facial feedback studies. So the idea here, hey, think about this. It certainly makes sense that your thoughts, affect your behavior, that your thoughts determine your behavior. But could it be the other way around? Could your behavior determine your thoughts? Somebody once said, you don't eat what you like what you eat. Okay? So we're going to be looking at how your behavior can influence your thoughts. So we're going to start out with transference research. Transference research by, Susan Anderson. There we go. So this effect that we see, we run into somebody who reminds us of someone we already know. It's kind of one of those deja vu effects, right? What Susan Anderson found is we have a tendency to transfer the prior person's personality traits and our attitudes towards them and our beliefs about them to this new person. Okay? So if the first person tended to be very compassionate, we tend to think that this new person will be. And what's interesting is that when we look at first impressions, they can be wrong sometimes, and there are situations then if you keep interacting with the person where you learn this, right, and you readjust your impression of them. But when it's a case of transference, when they remind you of someone that you already know, they tend to be particularly stubborn. So it takes a lot more disconfirming evidence before you restructure your impression of that person. Okay. All right, so research on unwanted thoughts. Dan Wagner was the first one to do a study on this, and really amusing study that is called the White Bear Study. And I want you to think about, all these situations in life when you are going to have unwanted thoughts. Let's say that you're trying to cut down on eating and you're trying really hard not to think about food. Okay? Or somebody just broke up with you and you're trying really hard not to think about that person. Or you've experienced a real injustice in life. Maybe you were fired for something that somebody else did, but you can't prove it. Okay? Which, by the way, those types of injustices in life really can cause insomnia. They can keep you awake at night because you try so hard not to think about them. And that's all you can think about, right? So Wagner was the first person to show in a study we've all experienced in life, but in a study to show hypersensitivity of unwanted thoughts. So this is kind of humorous. It starts out rather humorous, the white bear study. It's very famous for this study, the famous white bear study. Some of you may have heard about this in another class, but many of you probably haven't. If you were a participant in his study, you would show up at his lab and be seated at a table in a room all by yourself. And nothing on the table in front of you except for one of those little silver service bells that you hit on the top. You know what I mean? Okay. And this would be your instructions. We're going to leave the room and you're going to be sitting here for 15 minutes, and your job is to think about anything that you want to think about. In fact, you can think about, and they give you a whole list of things, right? And at the end of it, they say, you can even think about white bears if you want, but each time you do, okay, your only job in reporting your thoughts is if you happen to think about white bears, who want you to ring this bell each time you do, okay? Now, imagine if you were in the other group who were brought in again one at a time in the same situation with the same instructions, except they were given this whole list of things too, but they were told, but please do not think about white bears. And they were told two really important things that you need to do here today. One of them is try your best not to think about white bears. But the second one is equally important. If you goof up and you think about them, we need you to report it each time you do by ringing this bell. So which group do you think rang that bell significantly more than the other? And you might have guessed that it was the second group that was told, do not think about these, right? Please don't think about this, about white bears. It's such a famous study that a lot of Wagner's students actually had a tie made for him and gave him this tie that had specially designed for him and has tiny, tiny white bears on it. So when he's walking around, he doesn't see it in the classroom, but the students do. And they're all, of course, then thinking about white bears. So a particularly humorous study, white bears. But, you know, what did this tell us? Well, first off, it really confirmed that hypersensitivity of unwanted thoughts. The more you try not to think about them, the more you tend to. But Wagner went forth and did a lot of follow-up research. And he found out that if you have a plan in effect of something else to think about, another way to divert your thoughts, and you have it in effect before this happens, right, then you can be successful at decreasing, not totally eliminating, but decreasing those unwanted thoughts. An example of that might be if you are suffering insomnia because of an injustice in life. You know, one of the first things to realize is you're not going to sleep, period, right? You're not going to sleep, no matter what. So you might as well enjoy the time. Instead of fighting this, hey, get up. Instead of trying to sleep, which, by the way, has the opposite effect usually, right? Get up, but do something that is very relaxing. So as a student, you might find that you don't have much time for leisurely reading, fun reading. Keep a little stack of those kinds of books, you know, and tackle them during this time. And that's an activity where usually if you're doing that, instead of trying not to think those unwanted thoughts, you will get tired sooner. You might video games, but make sure it's a more relaxing one, not a fast-moving one. And I really advise you to go to your screen monitor settings and dim it as much as you can, and keep dimming it over time, because you don't want that bright light to keep you really awake and alert. You want to get tired. Right? So this brings us now to your very last self-assessment questionnaire. And so if you want to take out your self-assessment sheet in the title slot for questionnaire number 12, you can put tendency to obsess. tendency to obsess. And you're going to interpret this in the context of ASU student data. So, the possible range of scores here, lowest possible one is 16, and the highest possible is 112. So the possible range, 16 to 112. The range of ASU scores, by the way, is 25 to 110. 25 to 110, so they certainly haven't used up completely the opposite ends, the polar ends of the scale. And the ASU mean is 64.7. 64.7. So, are you pretty close to that mean? Are you different? Are you much higher? Much lower than that? Your tendency to obsess. Hopefully this has been a really interesting part of the class for you. I think that the white bear study is one of my favorite studies of all times, but we are not going to think about white bears anymore. We have so much information to move on to. We don't have time to keep thinking about white bears. All right. Okay, so some more cognitively inspired research. We're going to be looking at priming studies, starting with the next segment.